The Celebration Crown is a fun and quick knit. It's perfect for using up leftover yarn, and it's a good beginner knit. This is part of the 9 quick and easy knitted gift series. The whole series is linked in the description. Enjoy! So we're going to start off with some worsted weight yarn and a pair of 5mm needles. Now this is yarn that I found in my stash, so it's kind of mystery yarn. It's probably discontinued, but any kind of worsted weight yarn will do. So this crown is worked back and forth. I'm using a pair of circular needles, but I'm not going to join in the round. I'm just going to use these needles as if they were flat. So I'll turn my work over at the end of each row. So we're going to start off by casting on 9 stitches. So I'm just going to use a regular long tail cast on. If you're unfamiliar with this cast on, I'll link a tutorial video up top and in the description. Now that we've got 9 stitches, we're just going to knit 1 row straight. So here we go. We're just knitting this 1 row. So at the end of my row, I'm just going to turn my work over because we're working flat. All right, so now we're going to work our increase rows. Row 1 says we'll knit to the last 2 stitches. So let's do that. Here's my last 2 stitches. And then I'm going to do what's called a KFB, which is an increase. KFB stands for knitting into the front and back. So I'm going to knit into this stitch, into the front of the stitch, and then I'm going to turn my needle over and knit into the same stitch, but in the back of that stitch. Okay, I'll bring my yarn around, loop it around the needle, and pull out a second stitch. So now I've created 2 stitches from 1 stitch. So that's our KFB, knit into the front and back. And then we're going to slip 1 with the yarn in front. So that's very easy. We're going to take our yarn, bring it up to the front, and then slip this next stitch, the last stitch, from the left needle over to the right needle. And that's all there is to it. We'll bring our yarn to the back, turn our knitting over, and we're ready to work row 2 of the increase row. So row 2, we're going to knit 1. So we'll knit that stitch that we just slipped, and then we'll do another KFB. So I'm going to knit into this second stitch, okay, into the front, and then I'm going to kind of turn my needle over and knit into the back of the same stitch. Okay, so you can see I'm going into the back of the stitch, wrap my yarn around, and pull out a second loop, and that's another stitch. So we've increased by 1 stitch. So that's our KFB. Then we're going to knit to the last stitch. And when we get to the last stitch, we're going to slip 1 with our yarn in front. So I'm going to take my yarn, bring it up to the front, insert my right needle into this last stitch as if I were going to purl, and then just slip it right off the left needle. And that's all there is to the slip 1 with yarn in front. Now I'll bring my yarn to the back and turn my needle over. And now we're just going to repeat these 2 rows, these 2 increase rows, for a total of 6 times until we get 19 stitches. So we've been able to increase our stitches with those KFB. So if we count up our stitches now, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11, you'll notice that we've increased to 11 stitches because we started out with 9 stitches. Okay, so we're going to repeat rows 1 and 2 until we have 19 stitches. Let's go right back to row 1, which is knit to the last 2 stitches, KFB, and slip 1 with the yarn in front. So here's my last 2 stitches. I'm going to KFB into the second to last stitch. So I'm going to knit into the front stitch, and then I'll turn my needle over and work another stitch into that same stitch, but in the back of the loop. I'll bring my yarn around, pull out a second loop, and then drop it off the needle. And now I will bring the yarn up front, slip 1 with the yarn in front, and then slip that last stitch as if I were going to purl it, and then drop it right off. Okay, and that's row 1. Row 2, we're going to knit 1, then we'll do a KFB. So we'll knit into the stitch in the front, then we'll kind of turn our needle over and knit into the back of the same stitch through the back loop. Pull out a stitch, and that's our KFB. And we'll knit to the last stitch, and we'll slip 1 with the yarn in front. So the slipping with the yarn in front creates a really nice selvage edge, which makes our crown look really neat and even. So here's our last stitch, and I'm going to bring the yarn up front and slip it right off. Okay, so when we're slipping as if to purl, right? When you purl, you kind of go from the top to the bottom, and that's how we're slipping. So we're not slipping as if to knit, right? So when you're knitting, you go from the bottom to the top, and you slip off. So we are not doing it this way. We are slipping from the top to the bottom. Repeat rows 1 to 2 until you've increased to 19 stitches. Now I'll count out my stitches. I've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, and 19. Perfect. So now we can start our decrease rows. So you can take a look here. We've kind of got a little sort of ascending part of the crown. And then now we're going to go down and complete the second half of the triangle. And we'll decrease these stitches down back to 9 stitches. Let's start our decrease round 1. So decrease round 1 says we're going to knit to the last 3 stitches. So let's go ahead and do that. And here is our last 3 stitches. So what we're going to do is knit 2 together, and that's exactly what it sounds like. These next 2 stitches, we're just going to knit them together as if they were 1 stitch. So I'll insert my right needle into these 2 stitches and bring my yarn around, pull a loop through, and now those 2 stitches have become 1 stitch. So that is a decrease. And then we're going to bring our yarn up front and slip 1 with the yarn up front. So just like this, okay? Bring the yarn to the back, and that is row 1 of our decrease. Now we'll turn our yarn over and work row 2. Row 2, we're going to knit 1, and then we're going to knit 2 together. So again, these next 2 stitches, we're going to insert our right needle into them as if they were 1 stitch. So here we go. Push our needle through these 2 stitches, bring the yarn around, and knit these 2 stitches together. 2 stitches have become 1 stitch, and that is our decrease. And then we're just going to knit to the last stitch and slip it with the yarn in front. And that is all there is to our decrease rows. Pretty simple, right? And we're going to repeat our decrease rows, row 1 and row 2, a total of 6 times until we are back to 9 stitches. So here's our last stitch of row 2. I'll bring my yarn up front and just slip that last stitch onto my right needle, bring the yarn to the back, and that is all there is to the decrease rows. So I want to bring your attention to the selvage edge right here. So when we're doing our slip 1 with the yarn in front, this is what it does, right? It creates this knitted selvage edge, which looks really neat and pretty. Continue to knit the decrease row 1 and row 2 until you have 9 stitches left on your needle. So now we've completed our increase and decrease repeats. And if you take a look at their knitting, you'll see that it looks like a little triangle, right? This is the first kind of point of our crown. And now we're just going to repeat the increase and decrease rows until the knitting is the length that we want for the head that is going to wear this crown. So for a regular adult head, I'd say that you would do this repeat about 7 to 8 times. Now we're going to go right back to increase row 1. However, I'm going to give you a little tip that's going to save your butt and make your crown look really nice. And you really only do this when you are starting a new repeat, right? So after 1 repeat's done and you're starting a new one. Okay, so we're going to go right back to increase row 1, which is knit to the last 2 stitches and do our KFB. Okay, so let's do this together. Here we go. I've gotten to the last 2 stitches, and now we're meant to do our KFB. Now, instead of just doing a regular KFB, knitting into the front and then knitting into the back, we're going to grab this strand of yarn that's kind of between these 2 stitches, right? So if you kind of push the 2 stitches apart, you'll see a strand of yarn running between them. So I'm going to insert my needle into this strand of yarn, and then I'm going to insert my needle into this stitch. Okay, so let's do that again. Got my needle, I'm going to insert my needle into this strand of yarn, and then insert it again into my stitch. And then I'm going to wrap my knitting around it and pull out a first stitch for my KFB. Then I'll turn my needle over and insert my needle again into the back to complete the KFB. This is the knit through the back loop, and then drop it off the needle. Okay, and that's all there is to it. Now we're going to bring our yarn up front and slip that last stitch off. Bring the yarn to the back, and that is our increase row 1. Now when you do this grabbing of the yarn between the 2 stitches, you prevent a hole from forming. And you only do this when you are starting a new repeat, okay? So when you do your row 1 increase again, you're not gonna do this, right? You're just gonna do a regular KFB. You only do this when you're starting a new repeat. So when you don't grab that strand of yarn, when you start a new repeat, you end up with a little hole. So this is what I'm talking about. When you're making that KFB, if you didn't grab that strand of yarn, you would end up with this hole. But when you do grab that little strand of yarn when you're starting your repeat, there is no hole. It looks nice and neat. So you can compare these two, right? The hole isn't crazy noticeable, but I just think it's kind of unsightly. So just by doing that little extra step, you can eliminate that hole and your join between the repeats looks really nice and neat. So I've done 7 repeats in total and my crown looks so cute. Oh, I just love this little guy. So you can tell how many repeats I've done just by counting the points, right? I've done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 repeats. And when I wrap this around my head, I think it looks pretty good. It fits well. If it feels a little bit too tight, you might want to do 1 more repeat. Once the crown feels nice and snug, we are going to cast off. We're just going to do a regular cast off, knit 2 stitches, bring the first one over, and that's pretty much it. Now when you're at your last cast off stitch here, we're going to cut off about 10-12 inches or so because we're going to do some seaming. So we don't want our yarn to be really short. We're going to thread up this yarn later on and seam our crown together. Thread it through that last stitch just to secure our knitting. And there we go. Our knitting is secure. Now you'll notice that the points of the crown are a little bit droopy. So we're just going to bring this over to the iron and we'll do a little steam block so that these points are nice and pristine. I'm just going to pin these points onto my ironing board and make sure that they're really nice and pointy and pin them in place. So now I'm going to get out my iron and I'm just going to press the steam option on my steamer across the whole crown. I'm not touching it. I'm just kind of hovering the steamer 1.5 inches, 2 inches over the crown and just kind of focusing on those points. And then we'll just let this come to room temperature. Our points are looking nice and sharp after the steaming, and now we're ready to seam our crown together. This is the remnant from the long tail, so I'm just going to weave in this end here, just clean it up. Now we are going to decide which is going to be the right side of the crown, so which is going to face sort of the world and which side is going to face your forehead. So once you've decided which is going to be your right side, you're going to fold the right sides together. And then we're going to seam together the crown at this point right here. We're going to work a very simple back stitch. So back stitch goes like this. We're going to insert our needle right at the edge, and then we're going to go forward a little bit, like, I don't know, 1 centimeter. And then we're going to go into the back. So this is where our yarn comes through. We're going to go a little bit back and push our needle through to the other side and then pull through. And then we're going to go again up front, maybe about 1 centimeter or so. And then we're going to go from the back, go back a little bit, like 0.5 centimeter, pull through. In the front, we're going to go about 1 centimeter forward. Here we go. And then we're going to go like 0.5 centimeter back in the back. And then once we get to the edge here, we'll just go through a couple times to secure the yarn. And then I'm going to weave in the tail end, just as we did for the tail end from the cast on. So I've gone into like 4 or 5 stitches, and now I'll take out my pair of scissors, snip it. And then we're going to turn our crown around. Now you can see that our crown is joined and it looks so cute. So go ahead and put this on, crown yourself or the person in your life who deserves to be your king or queen.